Hello, and welcome to February 2026 on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. I'm Ann Lloyd. I'm delighted you're here with us because as the world is full of chaos and change, I think we need history now more than ever. So sit back and enjoy as we see how history shows us what's possible. Thank you for being here. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. I'm delighted to have you here with me. And even more, I'm delighted to have Michael Livingston on the podcast to share with us some new insights into a time period we might think we know, but we still have a lot to learn about. So, Michael, thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into history, your interest in history, and in this time period in particular.
Oh, thanks for having me. I got interested in history, I think, from a very young age. In our family, we had a set of encyclopedias, and it was stored in my room. And so I read the encyclopedias as a child because I could sneak those into bed because they were like right there. You know what I mean? So I became interested in history really early. My career sort of ultimately landed me in sort of medieval studies, and I ended up kind of going in an English route because I needed to learn how to what we call paleography to read medieval ancient handwriting and get at manuscript archival material directly, and that's something that is taught here in the States within kind of English programs. And in the UK, it's a history thing, but weirdly, we do it the other way here. So I ended up doing a lot of language work and that sort of stuff to get as close as I could to the raw material of history. That was just really something I was fascinated early on. And then once I got into, working in the field and ultimately doing a lot of work on the Hundred Years' War, with manuscripts and retranslating things and all that, really kind of ended up feeling like some things need to be kind of overthrown a little bit. Things that we had long thought were one way might not be that way. And it ultimately unfolded into this project, which was which bit the whole apple, right? Let's try to do it all then.
Right.
Which is a little crazy, but someone's got to do it.
Well, I have it right here.
Ain't that pretty? Thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful and it is substantive. I mean, you can tell from looking at it, you're going to learn a lot. So you call it a new history, but it's something that we think we know about. So tell us some of how you think about it in different ways, what you discovered that led you to think about it in different ways. Sort of how did that unfold?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, walking into this, I mean, I knew what the Hundred Years' War was. We all do. I mean, it's one of the most famous periods in history, right? This is Henry V and Agincourt and Joan of Arc and really incredible stories that we all kind of know and appreciate. Even those who aren't kind of directly medievalists, they're so well known. They're through people like Shakespeare, as you well know. And so I knew what it was, but when you start writing a book on something, you have to kind of really get your head around what something is, right? You can't just repeat. And so, what really is starting this war? What really is ending it? And the more I started kind of pressing on those things, the more it kind of like fell apart. It was like this sort of thing, like you're trying to pick up water, and it just keeps running through your hands. The traditional dates are 1337 to 1453. That's the traditional date of the Hundred Years' War. It's actually 116 years, but that doesn't roll off the tongue. So, Hundred Years' War. And one of the first things I sort of coming around upon was, look, nobody who was involved in it called it that. Nobody. It was never declared started. It was never declared ended. It was never really declared ongoing. I mean, it's just like this is a label that was put on a period of history in 1823 for a French textbook without any thought process. It was just like, I need a label in this textbook, boom. And somehow that took on a life of its own. And people were drawing these kind of borders in history. and cutting this period off and saying, well, this starts in this date, ends this date, and it's separated. And the more I looked at those dates and then looked at the events that are happening, the less that all fit together, right? If that's the start date, why on earth is that the end date? If that's the end date, why on earth would that be the start date?
Right.
And what is really even happening here? And in doing that, it really forced me to go back through all the materials and take the widest view I could. And I end up having to kind of create ultimately a new set of dates, right? I dated a 200 Years War, which is actually the UK title of the book, is the 200 Years War. And from 1292 to 1492. And I also, the other thing I kind of was forced to do is I had been taught, and I think most of us have been taught, the Hundred Years' War from a very Anglo-centric, it's centered on England kind of viewpoint.
Yes.
Right? England starts this war. It's all about what England wants. And France is just kind of like along for the ride. And the more I looked at it, it's like, that's not at all what's happening here, right? That is a vestige of English education and stuff, and Shakespeare to some degree, that is driving that. And in truth, what is happening is during this period, France is defining itself, and England stands in the way of that. And that's what is actually happening. And that it's not just that story, right? It's also a story of France defining itself against, Castile and Navarre and the Holy Roman Empire and Burgundy and Brittany, like all of this at once. And that's why it's 200 years long. And that's why it has the major changes and impacts that it does. So I really kind of, just in the course of trying to figure out what the heck a story is, had to, really look at the nuts and bolts of it. And because of the way I work, I wasn't satisfied with just, well, my teachers taught me X, so therefore I must say X. I want to know, what really happened, right? What do the sources tell me? Where does that lead? And then try and create a way for that to come across to the reader.
Great. So let's look at a couple of the new dates, and then we'll look at some of the other people who were involved in specifically the French side of things, because that's not often really covered all that well.
Yeah.
So let's look at 1292, and because that's a good bit of time ahead of 1337. So why is 1292 the better date for us for that?
Yeah. So, there had been actually a previous quote unquote 100 Years' War over the Angevin Empire. That had ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1253. And that treaty said, this weird situation that we have in which the English king is also like a vassal of the King of France for lands in France, which goes back to Eleanor of Aquitaine and all kinds of fun stuff. And really ultimately goes all the way back to William the Conqueror.
William the Conqueror, yeah.
Yeah. So 1066 and all that. That sort of weird situation, we're all okay with it, so long as this sequence of boxes is checked. All right. And that was fine for a bit. And then in 1292, a man is murdered. We don't know his name. We actually don't even know what side he was on. Two ships from kind of different parts of France's leanings. One kind of English interested and the other one French interested. Met at a little island that you'd have to look at a map. It's a dinky little island out in the Atlantic called Jimenez. They meet there to take on fresh water, and they squabble over who's going to take it first. And a guy is killed. We don't know which side, but we know that it sets off a series of reprisals, right? It's like a domino that falls. And that causes this group to get reprisals on that group. And that causes this to do that. And it just starts escalating to the point that we have what many people sort of have called a pirate war. Now, it's called a pirate war. It's bloody and it's big. But theoretically, neither of the kings is saying to do this. This is kind of like a homespun movement. And but at the same time, the people on either side believe that the king on the other side is in charge of this, right? So that Edward the First, the king of England, the French are saying he's doing it, he's behind it secretly, and Philippe the Fourth on the French side, well, the English are saying, well, he's the one doing this,
Yeah.
right? It's believable that this is happening, and pretty quickly it basically becomes real because as a result of this, Philippe says to Edward, hey, remember the deal. You have to check these boxes. I'm going to call out, you must do one of these things. And Edward says, no way am I going to do it. And that sets off now a war between these powers. And it is then a war that continues forward for the next 200 years, right? So, I mean, it's a, I've had people sort of say, yeah, but it's just like one guy got killed. Like, what's the big deal? And you're like, well, yeah, one guy gets killed in Sarajevo and we have like
Yeah.
World War One. Like, this is
Yeah.
a thing that
It
happens, y'all.
happens.
Yeah. And so, we don't know this guy's name. He's not an archduke, but same sort of thing that it sets off a chain reaction. The ground was ready. It was dry. You just had to have a spark, and this did it. And it really, even for periods of relative peace where there's not a hot war, the Cold War is continuing. I mean, there really is no let up between these two powers, for the next 200 years easily. So 1292 is a fun, quote unquote fun, like fun for historians, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like a fun sort of thing to be like, well, wow, all this stuff that we think of later on, it started this small, and history can be like that.
Yeah.
Unintended consequences, right? And this was majorly unintended consequences because it gets
Yes.
so big so fast.
Well, and it's interesting because um the potential was there because of the weird situation with the King of France and a vassal in England. And there are times England's a stronger country. And how can I possibly be a vassal to the King of France? But this sets it off. Do you think this sets it off because people were just ready to fight? Or
I think
was it really just innocent and escalating?
I think they were. I mean, look, they'd come to terms in 1253. Well, that was like the previous generation,
Okay.
and I think from that point you have a chafing on both sides that like, well, I'm not happy with the deal Dad made.
Uh,
Right? That was good for him, but I lost a little something, right? When Dad made that compromise, I lost a little bit, and I'm not happy about that. And from the other side, well, we could have taken care of the English altogether, and we didn't because my dad said not to. I want to do it. So you have personalities that are kind of
yeah.
defined by that, and they are Edward the First and Philippe the Fourth are not weak personalities. Like these guys are very, very strong-willed, and it's like my way or the highway kind of personalities. And that clash,
Yeah.
once that sort of starts escalating, and you get to that point, I would love to say that this is something that only happened in the past, but unfortunately, it's not true.
Right.
Where leaders start to feel like they've got to, like I'll look weak if I don't sort of ratchet up to the next thing, and
Yeah.
I don't want to look weak, and so I'll just go a little further, and the other side's doing the same damn thing. I mean, that's what we get here, this clash. And then with each additional thing, that becomes all the more important to do. So neither of these guys feels like they can back down, and instead they're like, no, I'll double down. And when both sides are doing that, well, yeah, nothing really good comes of that.
Yeah.
So I think that they were ready to do
Okay.
it. I mean, it wasn't planned. I mean, I think it's true. Yeah, neither of these guys was like, all right, here's my secret plan. I mean, the chroniclers were saying that again. The English chroniclers were like, yeah, that the French are up to no good. This is all a secret thing, conspiracy stuff. I don't think that's the case, but I think Philippe the Fourth was the first one to say, well, I'm going to use this to my advantage, and Edward responded in kind.
Yeah.
And that process, then begins this escalation that continues forward. So yeah, it's a again, a sort of disturbingly, um, like we've seen that before kind of thing, and we see it again
And
and
we
again
see
in
it again.
history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's unfortunate in so many ways. So but we often look at Edward III rather than Edward I
Right.
as the instigator of this incredible big scale war. Why is that? What role does Edward III actually play?
So what Edward III does is he sends it up another notch.
Yeah.
So we usually date at 1337. 1337 is when Philippe first tells Edward III, "You're no longer in charge of these lands in France," which is a move that Philippe IV had done to Edward I. It's Philippe and Edwards all the time. Um, but in 1340, things get really exciting because Edward III says, "You know what? Actually, I should be the king of France instead of you." So in the intervening period, what has transpired was a marriage took place to kind of go from a hot war to a cold war. They had had a marriage take place in which Edward I's son, Edward II, ultimately married a princess of France. By no intention was this meant to create a claim on the French throne, but by hideous events in history, um, all of that princess's brothers all died without clear male heirs. So you had this problem of who's now going to be the king of France. Well, they ultimately went back a generation over to a cadet line, found the guy who becomes Philippe VI. But Edward III of England has a claim. He
Right.
doesn't push it at first. Even once they start fighting, he's not pushing that. It's not like he cries foul. This is a claim that he later makes because it's politically advantageous to do so. I don't think he really actually thought that there's like a snowball's chance in hell that this will ever work, but it's politically advantageous for me to do this, so I'll throw the card. But that becomes a thing that then is now a claim pushed forward.
Right.
So that, all the way, get until 1492, you've got the claim being made. I mean, really, in point of fact, the claim over that the King of England is the King of France, like that continues until there is no
Right.
monarchy in France. That's like
Yes. Yeah.
well past the French
Who the
Revolution that they're like,
Tudors?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess we're not that anymore, right? Which again is one of these things where I was taught that was what the fight was about. Well, then it wasn't over in 1453, right?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, Edward III is integral, not only because he ratchets it up with this extra claim, but also because he takes this to the fields of France
Right.
in scale. So this is where you get the first big land battle, which is the Battle of Crécy in 1346. That is Edward III. I've written a whole book on the Battle of Crécy. He did not intend to fight that fight the way it happened, whatever. But it did happen.
Yeah.
And once that happens, and they've had that big victory, and as a result of that, get Calais, that really radically changes the kind of calculus of war moving forward. And it is now the rest of the war is kind of in the shadow of those events. So, there's good reason to think about like Edward III as a real key figure in what happens here. But in terms of like starting the war, I just don't really think that really works. But he sure did escalate it in a new and very exciting way.
Yes. And even if he was not really going in saying, I'm going to claim and receive the throne of France that way, just by claiming it, he does make inroads that are tremendously successful toward that claim. So I'm going to speculate a little bit here. Had either he been healthier toward the end of his life, or specifically had the Black Prince not died before his father, because then the Black Prince comes in and he's a real warrior too for England. And it appears that England is going to possibly conquer France. Do you think? I know you don't know because it didn't happen this way, but might that have happened had the Black Prince remained healthy and outlived his father and taken the throne at that point.
It's interesting to speculate. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think England could ever really win this fight. The closest they come is really, Henry V, and had Henry V not bought it early. But I don't think Henry V even could have done this.
Yeah.
I really don't think so, because one of the things that is happening, again, if you think about what is the fight, what's it really about? Well, what it's really about is France figuring out who France is and what France is. And that process is really a struggle both within France and against its neighbors. But that within France part of it is really essential, in that France is gathering its strength. So for every kind of blow it takes, it's actually coming out kind of stronger for it. And even I mean, the Black Prince, young Edward, Prince Edward, he captures the King of France in the Battle of Poitiers in 1356. It doesn't end the fight. Like, it doesn't end it.
Right.
You would think, well, man, he just wrecked this French army. He had no business winning that fight. I mean, that's just an absolute goof show by the French. It's ridiculous. No business winning this. He knew it. Like, he was begging for terms in the hours before it went down, and the French were like, "Forget it. We've got you in a box. We're done." And then they screwed everything up, and he did very well. He did superbly. Captures the King of France and one of his sons. I mean, you can't do a lot better than that. And it doesn't end anything, right? It changes how things go, but it doesn't end anything.
Yeah.
Because in that vacuum of power, France finds sort of another vein of strength. So yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? But I don't think so. I think we would, at best, we would end up with a carved out chunk, like maybe Gascony would have stayed English. Something like that, or maybe they would have been able to keep Normandy or something. I could see something like that coming out. But I don't think you could have ever really won the whole thing.
Okay. So that's a really interesting point, even because you do see these successes of Edward III and Prince Edward,
Yeah.
pretty tremendous successes. So tell us about, because that seems like an end game. If you've got the king, you've had this big victory nobody expected, which Henry V does as well. These big victories that aren't necessarily expected, you're outnumbered, you still win. Tell us about France and how France is able, because that side of the story is not told very often.
Yeah, it isn't told very often, and it's a fascinating story, right? I mean, how does a kingdom survive without a king, right? And after the Battle of Poitiers, like, how does that happen? And almost worse, frankly. When Henry V invades, what we remember as the Agincourt campaign, which he did not intend for that battle to happen. Again, that's a whole nother thing. It's easy to think post Shakespeare of Shakespeare's stories being true, and they're just not. They're awesome though. My God, that Shakespeare guy is really going places. Yet when you even in when you think about Agincourt, right? Henry's not fighting France. He's fighting like half of France, because France is in the middle of a civil war.
Yes.
And it's in a civil war because the king is mad, which is almost worse than being captured, right? Because if the king is captured, you can kind of, well, we don't got to worry about what he says anymore. We just got to figure out who's in charge, since he's out, in prison over there with our enemies. Who's in charge now? Let's just keep going. When the king is mad, and is intermittently mad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the king of France is kind of in and out of lucidity. When he's with it, he's the king. When he's not, you're like, well, what the heck do we do now? Because we can't just sort of go on our own, because the moment he kind of gets back to his senses, if he disagrees with what we did, we're in trouble. So it really is detrimental. And so you end up with this kind of civil war situation that Henry is taking advantage of. Yeah, how does the kingdom survive that?
Yeah.
And and I mean, how they survive it is bloody. I mean, it is really bloody, not just against the English, but against themselves.
Right.
But what comes out of it is, I mean, pretty much hard to argue against. What comes out of it is French nationalism. They ultimately define themselves as in a kind of nationalistic way that wasn't there at the start of this fight, right? You had sides, but they were political sides with vassalage and things like that. This becomes something tied to the ground itself. A true sense of kind of patriotism in the kind of Latin sense of the word, of being tied to the country. That's something that comes out of this by necessity to survive, and everything that sort of follows from that, which becomes what we think of as the French monarchy. When people think of the kings of France, what they're thinking of is the outcome of this whole experience. When you go back to 1292 and the King of France, his kind of power is very localized, and
Right.
he's relying on relationships. By the end of this, you have a centralized French monarchy in the way that we think of it. So one of the many things that comes about in the 200 Years' War, including centralized taxation practices and standing armies and all the stuff that we think of as modern state, like it's more or less invented in France across this period by necessity. And I think nationalism is a big part of that, and it's why they're able to survive, and in fact come out so strong on the other side. Not that it's not without troubles. It's very
Right.
difficult. But I think that's really the key. And again, it's not the story we tell, because too often we are centered on this kind of English perspective. Even in down into the little moments in the weeds. There's at Agincourt, for instance. Everybody sort of tells the story about Agincourt. Henry V sets his lines and then moves his lines. I don't think this is true. I've written a book on this. But then moves his lines forward into an even better position before the French will attack him, and then the French all die. And it's like that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail where Lancelot's charging the castle, and the guards are just like sitting there, and you just get multiple, like, here comes Lancelot charging, screaming, and they're just like, yep, whatever. Like they're waiting for their cue to die, because who cares what they're thinking? Who cares what they're up to? And I think we've just done that in general with French history. They're just sort of not up to anything. They're just waiting to be acted upon by whatever the next move of our English hero is. And that's a fun way of doing history, I suppose, but it's not very historical.
Right.
Because the French really are up to things. So I think taking this kind of decentralizing in England, and I'm not that I'm trying to center France. I'm just trying to sort of, I'm an American. I don't really have a side in this. I'm like, when I said that the title was going to be Bloody Crowns, the reason it's the 200 Years' War in France is my English editor was like, well, bloody means something different here. The Bloody Crowns is not
what you
can't really say that. And I was like, well, I'm an American, actually. Bloody crowns. Like, yes, I don't like these crown business. They both have a problem as far as I'm concerned. So I don't really have a dog in the fight, but decentering things, I think you get to a bigger, better perspective of the international networking involved, and how everything's contingent on everything else, and understanding why the Low Countries, and why are they fighting in Spain, right? One of the Black Prince's great victories is the Battle of Najera, which is it's in Spain. It's in Rioja, which is great for wine, but that's not why he's there. He's there for all these other reasons. Well, what's going on with that? Why is that happening? Why are the French and English fighting in Spain? That bigger story, I think, is really, really fascinating. So it's the thing I was really wanting to get across in this book.
Well, that's great. So let's go back to nationalism a little bit, and the emergence of this French nationalism out of necessity to survive. How does that happen in the face of what is, in some sense, a crumbling French monarchy? I mean, it's certainly a very weak French monarchy. So how does that lead to a strong France? Because it doesn't seem like it would.
Well, it's going to go one of two ways, right? And I think this would be historically true. You could look at similar situations,
Yeah.
throughout history. What is going to happen? Either it's going to crumble entire,
Yeah.
or this is kind of like back against the wall. What are you going to do? You just start scratching your way forward, and that's definitely the route that goes here. Now, a lot of that is tied to personality,
Yeah.
right? The personalities involved. A lot of it is, I think, and this book was way longer before I had to cut it down to, I mean, it's a big book. It's a big book, but it was bigger. And the publishers were like, it can't be that big. I'm sorry. So one of the things that I had to sort of lose, that I was kind of sad about, but I do think is important is like this question of identity. What does a person on the ground, how do they define themselves? And the shift of that, because at the start versus the middle versus the end, I think that changes. And I think one of the things that actually is driving it in many respects is linguistic, right? That we define
Okay.
ourselves as a community by our ability to communicate with each other.
Okay.
And when you are sort of faced with kind of an existential crisis, you end up relying on community, on those social connections that we have as human beings to one another. And much of that, I think, can be sort of pointed to as being linguistically rooted, right? So what is it to be French? Well, part of it is you speak French, right? And that we communicate with each other. We speak the same language, and we come from the same place. And those begin to mean the same thing. They begin to collapse, and they are now patriotism, right? This is us versus them. Us is here. Us speaks this way. Them does not. And when the conflict is rooted in a sort of sense of what makes France, right? How do you define France? You then start moving into these sort of bigger symbolic questions that go back to the past. I actually start off one of the main chapters of the book early on with the coronation of Clovis, which is
Yeah.
way back there. Um, but he is crowned the king of France, or king of the Franks back then. And there's this story about him having this holy oil that is brought down, angels, people singing, it's great stuff.
Mhm.
Brought down that he's anointed with this holy oil. Uh, that becomes like identity, right? It becomes this like God has sort of chosen us. And here it is. This happened, and God has now chosen our king. France has the idea of the king is chosen by God in a way that other kingdoms don't really have because of this sanctified moment. Right. This is part of the reason why the king of France is a little bit bonkers, not a little bit, a lot bonkers. We can't just get rid of him. Like he was like chosen, right? So you
Yeah.
can't you have that connection point. And then when you start amplifying it with all this other, business of language and land, I think that's how you get a sort of nationalist identity, forged in fire, but actually strengthened by that fire.
Okay.
And then as you begin to sort of claw back, it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling, right, prophecy, right? Not that this is a battle that is kind of smooth. The 200 Years' War is not smooth. It is constantly kind of up and down. But I think through that, through even the lows, you still have this kind of sense that we are bound by a common purpose and a common identity. And again, it's not overnight. This is something that takes a couple centuries, but it really becomes definitional for France and England, right? England then has to define itself
Yeah.
in response to this. What does it mean to be English, right? Does English, um, does that mean a language? Does that mean a land? If it does mean a land, what land does it mean, right? I mean, people that lived in Normandy thought of themselves as English. How does that make any sense, right? If they were in Normandy and spoke Norman. They didn't speak English. How on earth are those people English? Well, it depends on what you define English as, right? And
Yeah.
we use these words now, and we have a sort of sense of meaning of them that is largely politically defined. But back then, these things were things that were coming up, right? They were growing, and this 2 centuries of conflict is the growing pains
Yeah.
for English identity, for, I mean, what we now call Spanish identity, right? It's French identity, Scottish identity, Welsh identity. All of these countries are all undergoing this traumatic birth at the same time. And I think it's very important to think about the ways that they're doing that collectively, instead of just, well, let's get to the next high point of English history, and end this story with Henry V and Agincourt, because we don't want to talk about the rest of the decades where we lost.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare didn't tell any of those stories, so
Right.
so forget it. It's much, I think, more conducive to think about these all together and the way they're interplaying.
Okay, so that's great. Before we leave France and this French identification, I want to ask about the impact of Joan of Arc.
Joan.
Yeah, to that sense of French identity that does not come from a monarch and does not come from a man. And those were the two sort of pillars that had driven things. So what shifts when it's this young woman who believed she was chosen by God and saw visions and got people to believe that? How does she fit into this picture?
Joan, the story of Joan is amazing. Joan is a figure that, writing that chapter was incredibly difficult because when I'm writing a book, obviously, kind of have what I'm trying to say, but I'm also really trying to think about how the reader is receiving this information. And with Joan, it was really important to me, to try and have the reader feel something of my own astonishment at her. I wanted the reader to just be like, yeah, man, she really is something. Because she is, she's a young woman. And I mean, look, there are incredibly powerful women in the Middle Ages. It's a very false thing just to look
Yeah.
back and say, oh, well, women didn't have any power, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh my God, like, let me show you the books. But um, by no means were women
Mhm.
treated equally with men. So you got that, and she's young, and she doesn't come from any kind of money, with no connection. I mean, it's just like strike one, two, three, four. How many strikes in the back? Like all these things against her. No military experience. Um, and yet, in the course of a few months, she basically changes this war. I think I say in the book, um, before Joan, there's a chance. Do I think it could have happened? No. But is there a chance that the English could have won? Yeah, I suppose. Like maybe you could see some quirky stuff happening. Maybe. After Joan, no chance. It's done. Like it is done. We're just playing out the line at this point. And this young woman makes that difference in history. It's absolutely amazing. Now, she's not unique in some ways. There are plenty of other women who are walking around saying that they're hearing voices and God's telling them to do stuff. That's nothing new. Um, so in that sense, it's not surprising. I think Hollywood or whatever would be like, my gosh, this is just the most amazing thing. For them to be kind of like, oh, it's another Tuesday. What's amazing is that somehow she captures enough attention, captures enough interest to kind of keep leveling up to the point that she is riding into Orleans, into the besieged city of Orleans, 1428, 1429, that had been under siege. She's riding in saying, well, I'm going to lift the siege.
Mhm.
And the people believe her. The military leaders there don't. They're kind of like, sure, sure. And she's like, no, I mean, that's just what's going to happen. And the people believe it. And what you're starting to see is like the loss of top-down, traditional leadership,
Mhm.
right? That, well, the people, the soldiery, they're following the inspiration, her. And the moment they start getting good results, again, it's sort of you double down on that, right? And it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy essentially. And the leaders are just kind of swept along. Like, well, the people are charging. My men are charging. I guess I better be leading the charge, right? You're like, well, that's not actually what leading the charge is. You're actually following the charge, but okay. But this is kind of how she ends up taking possession of France's spirit. Now, though she succeeds at Orleans, she does lift that siege, which is incredible. Um, there are then a number of battles immediately afterwards that go in France's favor. Is she leading those battles? No, she's not. Like, her biggest sort of military victory in the field, she doesn't show up. The battle's done when she shows up, but everybody gives her the credit. She becomes this kind of like magnet for things, which we see again other places in history where somebody, a figure, male, female, doesn't matter, becomes kind of a magnet of successes, and they're all attributed to that person. And in this case, it has this divine interventionist kind of perspective. She gets finally the Dauphin, the person who's kind of king in name, but not really king because he hasn't had that holy oil thing happen yet.
Right.
She makes that happen. So she really just radically changes stuff. Now, she also fails a lot. We don't usually get those in the movies. She fails a lot, and she's ultimately captured. And she made some egregious errors in how she got captured. I think she's a very human figure. She, I sincerely believe, she tries to commit suicide while a prisoner. She tries to jump to her death. It doesn't work. And it's one of the things that are sort of brought up against her at her trial you would try to take your own life. And she won't say that that's what it is. She says, well, I just thought angels would pick me up kind of thing. So that I'm not, so that I can't be said to have committed that sin. She ultimately is an incredibly tragic figure in that regard. This young woman who's been thrust into these roles, and it's kind of, she thrust herself in those roles, but in the end is a pawn in a bigger game that she really doesn't understand, and yet plays so well. We have the trial transcripts, and they are incredible to read. I translate some bits of them in the book. They're astounding to read, and they are, near as we can tell, perfectly accurate. They aren't, it's no conspiracy involved or whatever. They were really trying to get the facts right. They knew how important it was. And to read them, again, it's just to be an astonishment of this young woman, because she is out maneuvering these incredibly smart dudes who are trying desperately to pin something on her. And she keeps just like dancing around their questions, and in such perfect ways. You would think like, oh, that's a gotcha question. There's no way you can get out of that. And she would and she would say this thing, and you're like, well, that's literally the only loophole that you could have gotten through. How did you even know about that? How did you do that at such a young age and such inexperienced of so many things? Yet she's an incredible figure, and she ultimately becomes then a symbolic representation of France itself. That again is forged in all this awful situation. And obviously you can't go anywhere in France without like seeing a statue of Joan and a street to Joan. She has this incredible impact, and I don't think I at no point do I try to say, what is the reality of what's going on. Is she really hearing voices or whatever? Because I think it's immaterial. I think what's important about Joan is that she's a nexus for other people's beliefs. And it's really a story to me then of leadership, because these thousands and thousands of men follow her. What's important is what they believe. And in a sense, what she believes is kind of beside the point. I know it's fascinating, and I get people's fascinating with that, but I'm much more interested in like, why is why are they believing, right? What is in it for them? Um, and what is it that she's doing that's inspiring that belief? That's the kind of more important story, I think. And again, she just you can't you just can't like read about her or think about her without being astonished. Yeah.
And at the time, it seems like that does give people a sense of community or belief in someone, and she believes in them and she believes in France, and that reinforces that among people. As you say, the people are following her, so the leaders kind of jump on board, but she's just able to reach them on a level that it seems like a lot of the political leaders at that moment were struggling with.
Yeah, and success like leads to success, and the failures are kind of pushed aside, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she fails miserably at Paris. Um, yeah, nobody remembers that bit of the story, right? You remember the other bits of the story, which is its own. Joan is sort of like in a microcosm, the same thing that you get of, the way so many of us were taught the Hundred Years' War itself, again, which is
Mm-hmm.
this very Shakespearean, we can do no wrong, and making up all kinds of facts, whatever. And Henry V and his greatness and all that. And it's none of the warts. It's none of the, well, let's talk about all the times Henry V screwed up. No, 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 no. We don't do that. We don't do that. Just like you don't really talk about here's the
Yeah.
times that Joan screwed up, right? That
Mm-hmm.
the capture is, her capture is even is really often portrayed as this like thing that's done to her.
Yeah.
Um, when in fact you look at the sources and stuff, it's like no, she screwed up. Like she's screwed, and it's okay that she did. Like that's okay. She's human. Like and that happens.
Yeah.
But it's not the way that people want to tell the story. They want her to be weirdly both a pure victim, and also this pure heroine.
Yes.
And she's like simultaneously these things, which is just abundantly interesting to me. Whereas like you're like, well, no, she's actually kind of in the middle of those things because that's the way people are.
That's the way people
Um,
are.
yeah,
She's
but
human and she takes chances.
yeah,
And yeah,
I mean, when she gets captured, yeah, she's screwed up. She screwed up bad, but also being who she is, I'm not sure how you would foresee that day, for instance, going any different.
right.
And it's those same things that gave her success elsewhere. So
Yeah.
yeah, she's a very human character, but just absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to see there's a new movie that's in the works about her, and I can't wait to see
What they
what it
do.
what it does what it does with her. Yeah.
Yes. Well, she's amazing. So I did want to let you talk about her because I love the way you
Oh
talk
my
about
God.
her.
I could talk about her for hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about how the war extends beyond when we usually think of it extending and spreads beyond just these two countries and then it's over, but it's not really over. So how is it that we talked about how the beginning wasn't where we thought? How is the end not where we thought either?
So the typical ending is 1453, which is the Battle of Castillon, which takes place kind of near Bordeaux, in what was then called Gascony, which had been under English control from Eleanor of Aquitaine, and had been a source of a lot of struggle. In the Battle of Castillon, the English they get whooped. They get whooped, and they kind of get kicked out of Gascony. Not for the first time, but it'll turn out to kind of be the last time. Now that's the sort of endpoint that again nobody at the time was using, but that since the 19th century we have used. Um, I that doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for me for a few reasons. One, um, when the English left, it wasn't they didn't do so with any sense of, well, that's it, it's over. In fact, you get additional attacks that are made by invasions that are made by the English into France in 1475. Edward IV comes
Mm,
over to France with a very large army, an invasion that ends with the Treaty of Pecquigny against Louis the XI. And then in 1492, Henry VII does the same
mhm.
thing, which is how we get the Peace of Étape. That's where I ended. And the reason I chose that date is that really with the Peace of État, that's where France is sort of flexing against all of its neighbors, England being one of them. That's where that is kind of like done. Because with that peace, Henry says, okay, I'm not coming after these lands anymore. And also, Brittany is yours. Burgundy is yours. Like these other proxy fights that had been happening, I'm done. And it really is kind of, now everything is stabilized. France is, you look at a map of France in that moment, it's basically France as you get it today. There's a few little quibbling bits. Calais is still in English hands. But otherwise, look, this is France now. And England is no longer sort of playing that game. That to me is as close as you could get to a sensible ending point. Now, I try in the book to be as transparent as I can. Look, the label 100 Years' War, nobody used at that point. It's a 19th century thing. It's weird. My label is a me thing too, right? I'm also being transparent about this. Nobody called it the 200 Years' War either. But hopefully by taking this kind of perspective, we can sort of see in one sense kind of how silly labels are. Nobody sort of woke up one day just for the Middle Ages, right? And thought, oh, thank goodness the Middle Ages are over, right? We can all take showers, right? That's like so wrong in so many ways, right? These labels are convenient for talking about history, but we need to be really cautious about thinking about them as silos. And I think 1492 with the Peace of État, that now using that as a date makes sense of that invasion as well as the previous invasions, and makes sense of what is happening now within Europe as a whole. And in fact, it wasn't my intention. I chose it because of the Peace of État. But the fact that something else happens in 1492 with that Columbus bloke sailing the ocean blue, that is the next sort of phase of all this. Europe is now kind of like hunkered. We know what we are.
Spain is Spain.
Yeah, we're defined. So where are we going to like flex against each other? Well, over there, right? and now we get colonialism and imperialism, all that, and that huge difference. That is sort of the turning point. I think a more sensible turning point for history. It again, it can be weird, right? Because this means that from my perspective, the War of the Roses is a civil war within the 200 Years' War,
right?
That this has, in fact, owes its existence to what's happening on the continent. Right? The reason we have a civil war is because of getting kicked out, right? And it's because of all. That's why this is happening. And the moment Edward IV the moment he's got a chance, right? He's like, we're going back. We're flexing back into that, right? So I think when you sort of break the story arbitrarily in 1453, you've now these other things don't make sense. I think when you get them all together, okay, now this actually checks out. And then I think it kind of neatly, not intentionally, but then neatly enables us to see kind of how this period then connects to what comes next in world history. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that does make a lot of sense because the boundaries throughout are defined. It's not that neighbors don't keep fighting over them, but they're defined in a way they haven't been before. And that nationalism is at least becoming. Okay. So you've taken us into, and I'm trying to remember my French kings. And I know Francis the First is later. So you still have Louis on the throne in France in 1492, right?
1492, it's Charles VIII.
Okay. Charles VIII. Okay. And then
but look, if you're ever in question about it, always go with a
a
Louis.
Louis. I know there's
You
a Louis
know,
that comes soon
and like,
though.
yeah, your odds are you're going to hit one. In this case, it's
Yeah.
a Charles, but odds are
Okay.
with a Louis, you'll probably have a hit.
There's the Louis around the corner pretty soon.
Yeah, yeah,
And then you've got the Tudors in England, and
yeah,
so there's periods of not necessarily stability, meaning no conflict, but a sense of battles being elsewhere and then battles over religion. And so other battles are to come. But these national borders are pretty much set in 1492, with the exception of Calais.
yeah. I mean,
But that's so small by then.
yeah, I mean, the fight, France v. England, as it were. I mean, are they done with that yet? I don't know. Sometimes you're like, I think they're still fighting that. I'm not sure. I mean, you could say, oh well, that ends with Napoleon, right? Like that ends it,
Yeah.
right? When at Waterloo.
Waterloo.
I go, okay, maybe, but like, I don't know. Like, I
There's
pick up
still
the
some
news.
flexing.
Yeah, I pick up the newspaper in London every once in a while. And I'm like, y'all still fighting this stuff, ain't you? So yeah, I didn't want to say like 1492 England versus France is over, because I don't think it is. But then I don't think that's what this fight was in 1292, right?
Yeah.
It was instead about defining a nation, essentially. That's what can hold these pieces together, right?
Okay.
But again, it is, nobody said that's what they were doing in 1292 or
At the
14.
time,
Like
yeah.
that. Yeah, this is all, one way or another, we are putting labels on the past. And we're making those decisions, even for things that we think of as incredibly like straightforward, right? Like World War II. Well, actually, when did World War II start? Boy,
Yeah.
I could think of 20 different dates that would work for that,
Right.
and I could make an argument for any of them. Some of which kind of, wildly, before. Did World War I really actually ever end? Like, I
Right.
mean,
Well,
yeah, depending on how you define these things, it gets very squirrely.
yes.
So yeah, in some measure, what I'm just hoping to do is say, look, we need to be really careful about accepting these kind of after the fact labels as definitions
Yeah.
that we then use to say what's going on in the past, right?
Right.
Which, I mean, looking back, I'm sure I've done this in my own career, where I probably at some point some article said, well, it was the 100 Years' War, and that's why this happened. Well, that's actually kind of a weird thing to say when there never was a war to be. How is that defined? What's going on?
Right.
I
Yeah.
think it's useful to take these kind of step back and what really is happening, and therefore how do we understand events relating to each other. So yeah, my 200 Years of War, Lord knows it'll catch on, but
Yeah.
if it does nothing else, I
Bloody
hope that
Crowns
somebody.
is a good catchy title, though, at least in this country, right?
Isn't it though?
I really like that.
I just think it works. Like bloody crowns, take that bloody how you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I got it in the subtitle in the UK. It's the 200 Years of War, the Bloody Crowns of England and France.
Okay.
So I got in the subtitle. I got it close.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope that notion of taking a good hard look
Yeah.
at what labels we use and why when it comes to history at least resonates with some people for whatever it is that they're looking
Right.
at.
And looking at what it meant for other players. What did it mean for France? Not just what does it mean for England? And always an opportunity to talk about Joan of Arc is an opportunity well taken.
Absolutely.
So,
Joan, my goodness.
Joan. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. I'm going to hold this up again in case everybody's still watching Bloody Crowns in the US. Tell us where we can find you on social media, where we can see, and do you have a hint at what's coming next?
So michaellivingston.com is my website address. That's also, I think, my Blue Sky address.
Okay.
On some other things, I'm other names. I can't remember them all. I don't know. I'm really bad with social media. I don't know. And it all just seems like not good for you. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, you can find me on michaellivingston.com. That's where most of my stuff is. The books, of course, you can buy wherever,
Right. Right.
wherever fine books are sold. And yeah, what's coming next? I've got some work coming out, some more work on the Hundred Years' War coming out, in particular on the
Right.
Battle of Crécy.
Okay.
And then my next book project, I just signed contract for about 30 minutes ago, and I can't announce yet.
Well, that's
So
exciting. There's one to come. It's been signed, so you'll
yeah,
have to update us. Well, thank you so much for just opening up the way we look at this because it's such an important part of history. Over this period of time, so much changed in England, France, in all of Europe. And going forward, I mean, you mentioned 1492, this becomes a worldwide thing very quickly. And it's really helpful to think about it in these bigger terms and sort of come to grips with what that means. So thank you so much for opening our eyes to a bigger picture.
you're most welcome. Thank you for having me. Wonderful conversation.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you again soon on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics, where we had the chance to learn about Michael Livingston's new history of the 100 Years' War, Bloody Crowns. And when I think about this and our discussion through a leadership lens, it's an amazing reminder because when we think of this extended 100, or now we know 200 years of war, and we think of leadership, the military leadership that jumps to mind is Edward III or the Black Prince or King Charles of France. But one of the most important change-making leaders throughout this history is actually Joan of Arc. The least likely leader we'd be looking for, a woman, a young woman, a religious young woman, and yet her role in the French military signaled a significant, lasting change in the tradition, in the trajectory of the war, and certainly in the outcome. And it really shifted largely because of her. So it's a helpful thing to remember as history reveals what's possible and we see that leadership shapes what's next. Her leadership really did shape what happened after she emerged, this unlikely, least likely leader of the entire period. So thank you again for joining us. I look forward to meeting with you again on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics as we see how history reveals what's possible. Thank you.